welcome to another session brought to you by Georgetown Capital in partnership with myself. My name is Antonio Menezes, and I'm going to be the expert in the crude oil matters for today, more specifically the commodity traders, having gone through a couple of sessions via our partners, Georgetown Capital, which bring all these topics to you, all these exciting topics, I must say, from the crude oil to a couple of previous sessions that we had on natural gas, oil refining, petrochemical industry, from really a range of topics that will suit you best and will benefit you for you to have a better understanding of the energy sector, starting initially with the crude oil market. And today, we are going to dive into the commodity traders market. What do the big boys in the industry do? But before we do that, really, I just want to go through a recap session on the crude oil market as well as the oil refining, because those will prove to be crucial for you to understand really what the commodity traders do and how they get hold of their cargo and how they really transport. But the most important is to be able to answer what is it that they are transporting, what type of commodity is it, and why they are doing so, and where they are based and how they operate out of these bases, basically. So just jumping straight into the crude session that we had in the previous weeks, just in case you are more familiar with one or two sessions rather than getting in touch with Georgetown Capital to get access to the whole package. But if you have just got access to a single one, whether it is the crude or the oil refining or the petrochemical, I want every single one of you, the viewers, the listeners, to be able to be on the same level when it comes to understanding what is crude, how it comes to be, and where it comes from, really. And we started that the crude session underline what crude is. So I'm just going to pause initially on the first slide just to talk to you a little bit about the crude. As I mentioned, we've gone through that session in the previous weeks, and as soon as we get on the same level as to what is crude, why it is traded, and the oil refining process behind it, and what are the traders really trading, then we can come back to the commodity traders and you will have a much bigger and clearer picture of what is going on in those vessels. So we started by understanding crude, and we had said that crude is a mixture of hydrocarbons. Really, what that entails in terms of chemistry, organic chemistry, we want to think of CH bonds, carbon and hydrogen, where the lowest carbon C1 will be methane, all the way up to the highest one. And that composition, we said that once you start diving into the world of crude oil and petrochemical and fractions, you're literally diving into the world of chemistry. And that's basically what crude oil is. It's a compound, it's a molecule, it's a mixture of hydrocarbons. A lot of people call the black gold fluid, which is hidden underground. And we picture the different types of underground, conventional and unconventional. Just to bring you up to speed, the conventional is one of those type of reservoirs that you can easily extract your crude oil, and by reservoir we mean a space underground, a cavity underground with porous space and what we call permeability, i.e. the interconnectors or the channels for the crude to flow. We saw a couple of properties of crude because that will be a paramount or major factor that will allow, or that commodity traders will be paying attention to, and it will allow to develop trade across multiple parts of the world. So we spoke mainly about the sulfur content, and we also spoke about density / specific gravity, because those are very important properties. On the back of the sulfur content, the more sulfur content your crude has, the more chemical or refining process it has to undergo in terms of to get rid of that sulfur content. And in the oil refining, we saw a couple of processes that we can actually remove these sulfur content from in terms of density and the specific gravity. What we actually wanted to mention by that is that high density means low API gravity, and that is important so that you can able to differ between heavy versus light crude. As you can imagine, heavy crude will have a high density but a low specific gravity, or a low API gravity. On the opposite side of the things, you find the light crude, which will have a low density and a high API gravity. And do please get in touch with Georgetown Capital in case you want to know a little bit more on what we really mean by low and high density, or the API gravity. What are the markers that I'm using there? As I said, multiple grades of crude, and one that we are going really to be interested is the one that Guyana uses to benchmark its crude, which is Brent crude, or UK oil that comes out of the North Sea. You also have the WTI, which is the West Intermediate Texas, that's US oil, or the Dubai, which is a Middle Eastern benchmark from which a lot of crudes in the Middle East, Iran, Iraq, for example, are benchmarked against. Or even yeah, as the name suggests, the Dubai, which comes from that Middle Eastern bar. So we also went through very quickly, as we are going to see again, and it's going to be very important for the commodity traders market, where the crude is being used and where are the main consumers. But I just want you to picture that for the time being. So if on one hand we have the consumers, which entails areas of demand, on the other hand, then we need to have the producers, the suppliers, and those are usually the OPEC countries. And the OPEC countries, for the organization of the countries that produce crude, those are mainly 13 or so countries that take part in this joint organization of all these countries that produce oil, and they span from countries in the African continent, for example, Algeria, Angola, Congo, Gabon, for example. We also include countries in the Middle East, which were some of them were the founding members, just for you to have an idea of what the founding members of these organizations were. We're talking about Iran, Kuwait, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, and Venezuela. Those were the main 5 countries that actually founded the organization, and no surprise, up until now they comprise of OPEC, and they make very important decisions when it comes to the crude oil market. And that is important. What the OPEC does is to regulate the supply and the demand so that price can reach an equilibrium. So from that point of view, we have already touched on what crude is and who the market regulators are, and a couple of market participants, especially from the supply and demand point of view. On the demand side, though, we will see in one of the slides that there are specific countries that will import the majority of crude, i.e. there are specific countries that constitute the major crude importers, and that is important from a commodity trade point of view, because as a commodity trader you need to know where to get your crude from, i.e. the origin, and bear in mind that origin is associated to the type of crude, the grade, the granularity, and the type of refinery as well. And on the other hand, point number 2, you need to know where your areas of demand is. You need to know who your consumer is. And from one of the sessions that we had on refinery economics, we noticed that not all refineries are the same, right? You have different type of refineries. So that is another aspect that the crude traders need to take into account. When you're transporting your crude from point A to point B, then it's very important that you know the type of refinery that you're taking from, to the type of refinery that you're taking to. You cannot take a heavy crude from, of course, from an installation, from a refinery installation that into a refinery installation that only produces light grade crude. That is simply a no-go zone. So what we'll see, moving on to our very first slide, so we just diverting your attention from the very first slide, is that all these commodity traders, they actually have one thing in common. They are all located in Switzerland. That's what we have. Point number one, Switzerland, the commodity trading hub. And why do you think that is? Switzerland doesn't really have any natural resources. However, it became a very influential commodity hub because of a combination of two main factors: the tax privilege. You don't pay high taxes on your financial transactions, of course, or the income from financial transactions, which derivates from the crude oil deals, crude oil, natural gas, like any other commodity, or even financial derivatives of these, which have the crude or natural gas as underlying commodities. And point number two, itself, it's a strong financial center with more relaxed regulations. And you see the quotation or the speech marks in there, more relaxed, because obviously I don't want to give the impression that Switzerland doesn't have any regulations. But when it comes to countries, for example, like the US or the UK, which implement a lot more or a lot stronger regulations and potentially higher tax privilege on activities associated to the trading of crude oils, then compared to those countries, Switzerland is what we want to call a strong financial center and somewhat a safe haven for these commodity traders that were able to set up their businesses in Switzerland and take full advantage of these tax privileges. So going back to the oil refinery, it's important for you just to have a quick overview, a quick shot of what oil refineries do. Basically, they convert the crude oil that you get from those, let's call the areas of supply, your OPEC countries, Angola and Nigeria, for example, or even Venezuela and Saudi Arabia, and they convert that into marketable products thanks to the refining processes. And refining processes, those tend to comprise of a series of chemical, physical, and conversion processes that will transform basically or break down your bigger crude molecules into marketable products. We were saying earlier on that you have different types of refineries, from the most simple refinery to the most complex refineries. And what you really want to do in terms of your refineries is to make those, let's say, from the most simple one, which is a topping refinery, and you want to take full advantage of the gas fractions, because the very early fractions that you can process from that refinery will be the gas. As a commodity trader, you need to know that, all the way down to your most complex refinery, those ones that are able to transport more complex fraction, and are able to refine more complex fractions, should I say, rather. And what that really means from a trader's point of view is that if you transporting crude, it's very likely that you might be transporting crude. We will see that crude is mainly used for industrial purposes, but the question then remains, that is that, from at least an economic point of view, is that a way that we can transport under one vessel different type of tanks within the same vessel? Can we transport different commodities? Can we transport crude and potentially dirty petroleum products, as we saw the category in one of our type of products? That's the dirty market, fuel oil. Can we put under different tanks within the same vessel so that is economically viable? That is something that you need to take into account to, or you actually going to, if the answer is yes, are you transporting fuel oil as a bunkering fuel? Is that something, bunkering means something that you're going to put into your engine and power your vessel? Or, for example, if you're transporting fuel oil to areas of demand, for example, like in Singapore, where you're going to see a lot of the commercialization of fuel oil. That is exactly why we have in this very first slide that the use of crude is exclusive to refining into product industrial processes. That's why at the very bottom it is used premium use is for transportation. Why? Refining 101, crude, light fractions, gas at the very top, middle fractions, you have the middle distillates, diesel and gasoline for cars, jet kerosene, for example, for aviation, your planes. That's basically what you fuel up your planes with, and heavy fuels like heavy fuel oil or heavy sulfur vacuum gas oil, aka HSVGO, which in the case of the fuel oil, as I mentioned, is used as a bunker fuel. So what really drives the trade, what really drives the market, what really drives traders to do what they do, to transport or at least to trade that precious black gold fluid, the black gold liquid, which is basically the crude oil. First of all, what are the properties that, what are the conditions, the market conditions that will drive these trade capabilities? It will be the crude oil supply, as we mentioned. For you to be able to transact, to transport crude, you need to have areas of supply and you need to have areas of demand either for the crude itself or for the product demands that come from it, the gas or the middle distillates like fractions, like gasoline, naphtha, or even the heavy fractions. But we want to keep a tight grip on the price, and that is when OPEC comes into place. The stock levels, of course, basically, let's just for your info, we know that in the US you have this organization called the EIA, the Energy Information Administration, which is every Wednesday at a certain time of the day, usually 3 p.m. UK time. They tend to publish stock levels so that people are aware of the stock availability to trade, and that's important for you, for example, to know what stocks are available. Let's say the stocks available in tanks, or what we used to do as well as part of the company that I used to work for, we would want to know what is being in stock and what is being traded offshore, for example. Not to mention, of course, the refinery operation as it goes in line with crude supply and product demand. But we saw that what makes Switzerland special in terms of a commodity trading hub is the government policies and taxation, which is very important to drive the trades alongside the interfuel competition. What I mean by that, as you have in bracket, is oil and gas, coal for power generation, though you need to be aware of the rise of renewables. Also, for power generation, you have wind and solar, for example, and other sources, of course. But what that implies, it actually plays a big factor on the price. The rule of thumb is, let's say that if you have excess of a commodity in the market, and let's assume that demand remains constant, then the price goes down because you have too much of something. The opposite is also true. When you have a scarcity of a product, then what we are saying really is that scarce products, assuming that the demand remains constant or even goes up, then the prices will drive up. What about substitutes? What about complementary products? And that's where interfuel competition might also come into. If you have substitute products, literally products that can substitute the use, let's say, of natural gas, or the products that are indexed to the crude oil, then that is very important. That will play a major impact on the pricing on the commodity. We know from the previous lecture or from the previous session that we had on natural gas, we know that natural gas is indexed to the price of the crude oil, i.e., when the price of the crude oil moves, so thus the natural gas depends on the regional implications, or depending on the region that you are, whether you are in a continent such as Africa, Europe, or in North America, for example, those will have different gas market structures or different gas pricing structure that is going to be indexed to oil or gas on gas competition, for example, that is going to drive the prices down. The public opinion, for example, it plays a major role in that. Why? Because one of the examples that I gave at the very beginning, for instance, was the public opinion related to safety concerns or CO2 emissions. If you're using, for example, fuel oil to power your vessels, now remember in 2020 we had IMO 2020, which came along, and it was all about curbing sulfur content from the vessels. We don't want to pollute the sea. We don't want to affect marine life. And that is something that commodity traders need to keep up with: the development of technology, development of vessels, and vessels which can actually keep up with such a progress. If you're transporting LNG, you want to your LNG carrier to be refrigerated at correct temperature, for example, to avoid LNG to lose pressure and lose properties, because LNG is liquefied natural gas. Likewise for crude, you want to avoid corrosion, because one of the things or one of the properties that we mentioned about crude is that crude underground, it's usually not found on its own, right? So crude is found with water and often with gas, and a lot of processes that crude undergo, for instance, will be demethylation to remove, as the name suggests, demethylation to remove metals, and desulfurization to reduce sulfur, or the desalting, which is the removal of salt. All these we can categorize them into chemical, or into more specifically toxic agents, which will reduce the quality of your crude. Reduce the quality of your crude, reduce the spec, therefore it cannot be traded. Off spec crude loses value, if not cannot be traded. Geopolitics, security of concern, speculation. Let's talk, as of today, the 25th of Feb, let's talk about Russia and Ukraine. But let's move slightly from the crude just for a short second, and let's focus on the gas market. For instance, we know that with Russia, we have the Nord Stream 2 pipeline associated to Russia and into Germany, for example. Now with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, we know that that pipeline is no longer going ahead, and Russia has long and continues to be the major supplier of gas into European countries. So that plays a major impact. Now, all these geopolitics between geopolitical conflict between Russia and Ukraine is actually playing a massive impact, or a massive factor in the price of gas at the pump, like the Americans will tell you. So there is a lot of plans or a lot of provisions in place to ensure that the supply or the disruption that Russia is causing, given the Ukrainian invasion, doesn't really affect that much in terms of price at the pump. At the moment, we saw the prices of crude spiking from 85 dollars per barrel to 105 in a week, or roughly in a week and a half. So just in the last 2 days, if not even in the last 2 days, since the 24th, the official, when Russia officially sent troops into Ukraine, the prices of crude jumped from $90 a barrel directly to 102 or so region. So that is an increase by given geopolitical events, which brings along the concept of security concerns and as well as speculation. That is that is very very important for you to know. And just on the crude grades, again, to reiterate that multiple crude grades will really play a major impact for what we've been what we've been talking here. So moving on to the next slide, what we have seen basically what drives the market, but now I just want to jump straight in into what really drives the trade and the players in the oil market, which is where we are going to see mainly our oil traders, as we see here, the Vitol, Trafigura, or as the market says, Trafi, Mercuria, and Ganvo. We also have multiple other commodity traders and social commodities like the Japanese Marubeni. The company that I'm currently working for is actually a subsidiary of Marubeni. Marubeni is our parent company, and what you have here, Sosha, it really means that these type of companies like Marubeni, Mitsui, and Mitsubishi, they are involved in every single aspect of trading and in every commodity market, from liquid commodity trades to crude, all the way to gas as well as metals. They trade steel, they trade commodities like grain, they trade. That's what these social these social Japanese trading companies do. They trade from all specs, all range of commodities. Commodity traders, Glencore, if you're familiar with Glencore, they also involved in the metals market. They trade steel, they trade coal, they trade all these type of commodities. But I will want to um, pay particular attention on the oil traders, more specific on the Vitol side, Trafi, Mercuria, and Ganvor. But really, one question to ask: okay, why does Vitol want to move their cargoes from, let's say, point A to point B? Point number one, what they want to do is they want to buy to be able to meet demand. There is this statistic that goes around saying that on a daily basis, per day, there are 40 million barrels of crude being traded, and half of it, 20 million, are products. 40 million barrels of crude per day are traded, and an equivalent of 20 million of barrels of product are traded on a daily basis as well. So, buying to meet demand from a refinery, or market maker, or consumer, and you want to be selling your production, as in the crude oil producer. Remember, OPEC countries, they want to produce a different spec of crude, as we are going to see. But also, what they also want to do is that what these trading companies do, apart from their physical cargo movements, they also take speculative, let's say speculative positions in the market, where by speculation we mean that they are able to speculate whether it's going to be a buy or sell, i.e., whether the price of crude of oil of the price of crude is going to go up or is going to go down, and they're going to put a buy or sell orders accordingly. So with shipping as well, you need to be aware of, there are a lot of what we consider in the shipping industry Incoterms, and Incoterms are designed to define the areas of origin and the areas of demand. For example, you can buy CIF, cost insurance and freight, you can actually, no, you sell CIF, cost insurance and freight, or CFR, cost and freight, which are designated at the areas of origin, or you buy FOB. You buy FOB, free of board, and that's the area of origin. And just to reiterate, you sell CIF, cost insurance and freight. The name suggests it takes into account the insurance and freight, but of course you need to be aware of who pays who and who pays what is entitled in terms of contract. So I will let you dig more on the Incoterms that you use in the market for shipping on your own. But just bear in mind, the main three that I see the most in the shipping market will be: you buy FOB, free on board, and then you sell CIF, cost insurance and freight, or just CFR, cost and freight. um, as I was saying, you buy trading for profit, speculation, or derivative, financial derivative trading, like paper trading. With paper trading, you have, for instance, you have your futures. With the financial derivative contract, I might say you have your futures contracts, you have your swaps, you have exchange of physical, for swaps, CPS. You have multiple different financial derivatives available that these financial derivative these trading institutions can take advantage of. The paper arbitrage, i.e. the paper barrels, you can trade forward, and the whole point of this is to exploit the spread between the markets, arbitrage difference between the price in one area, the FOB price, and the price at FOB, the price at CIF or CFR, the area of destination. And basically, as definition of what derivatives are, using or offering management tools, you have different type of plays. Contango is one of the plays, and backwardation is another. Take advantage. Contango and backwardation, those are basically strategies whereby contango, the price in the future is actually more expensive, is actually higher than the current than the spot price, whereas backwardation, as the name suggests, the price is backwardated. The current price is actually higher than the price in the future. So these are a couple of strategies that are in play for a trader to basically to trade their cargoes. And then you have the time horizon that they can actually trade for: spot, single delivery, short period, or term deal, 6 months. In my current job within the risk analyst as a power and gas, we trade multiple granularity products, and one of them, for example, the 6 months, it would be a season would be a winter or a summer, which is basically 6 months. So you can trade, in this case for crude, you can trade up to a year long. So just to bring you up to the players in the oil market, you're going to have major oil companies: BP, British Petroleum, Chevron. You're going to have Exxon Mobil and Shell, the Dutch company. Large integrated companies: Total in France, Repsol in Spain, and the Italian Eni, or ENI as you wish to call. So all these are large. These are large integrated companies. You're going to have your your NOCs, national oil companies, or IOC, international oil companies. National oil companies, remember that each country that produces, or each country that is a member of OPEC, you're going to have definitely, most likely going to have a national oil producer that is backed by the state. Pemex, that's petroleum from Mexico. Saudi Aramco from Saudi Arabia. Statoil, and KPC, the Kuwait. Statoil is probably the Norwegian. Statoil, yes, likely to be the Norwegian. PTT is the petroleum from Taiwan, and NNPC then is going to be NNPC will be the Nigerian company. So yeah, you're going to have also the PTT will be, just a correction, that PTT will be the Thai petroleum from Thailand. And yes, so the Nigerian NNPC will be the Nigerian. The Russian one, you're going to have Lukoil and Rosneft, as well as Tatneft. And the refineries, you're going to have a lot of those in the US: the Valero, Reliance in India, SR, Vadinar, and Caltex, that's South Korea. But what we're interested is on the oil trader side, which is Vitol, Trafi, Mercuria, and Gunvor. So I have prepared a couple of slides for you, so that for in the best of your interest, so that you actually know which areas Vitol Trafi operate, as well as, for example, which areas Ganvor and Mercuria operate. And here I'm going to zoom in slightly on the Vitol operations, and what we have here is Vitol based in Switzerland. Also, they buy mainly from Russia, US, UK, Nigeria, and Libyan crude. Cargoes bought by Vitol go mainly to Italy, China, or APAC, Asian Pacific, and ARA, Amsterdam, Rotterdam, and Antwerp. That's an area, a trading area within the Netherlands, which is a major hub for trading cargoes. ARA, ARA, Amsterdam, Rotterdam, and Antwerp. And as you can see, what I did here, what I put together is just a list of countries. Since we know that Vitol mainly buys, now we can start to break down the areas that these commodity traders operate. So from Africa, for example, you see that a lot of these cargoes are coming from Nigeria, they're coming from Libya, and they're also coming from Angola. So when we put together, for example, the Libyan cargoes, we can see the grades that are coming out of Libya. You can see that out of Libya, you have mainly this amna, that is a type of grade, and is being imported mainly by Thailand. Now, depending on the type of grade, the specifications of crude that this amna is, um, bear in mind that is going to Thailand, therefore Thailand should have the ability to process this grade of crude. And a disclaimer here, as we said multiple times, is that now we know that different grades will have different specs, will have different properties, different API gravity, different sulfur content. So need to be aware that although it's coming from the same country, it might be coming from different installation that process different crude, and that different crude is being loaded into different vessels chartered by one of these commodity traders, either Vitol, Trafi, Mercuria, or Ganvor. But again, all these commodities have the similarity of being located in Switzerland. For example, out of the Russian Federation, out of Russia, you can see that a lot of this crude, that's the famous Urals that is coming out of the Russian Federation. And in the last slide, we're going to see a couple of properties really from the main crude grades. Urals is one of them. LCD coming out of Libya is another one of them. Kirkuk out of Turkey, for example, is one of them, and yeah, and then from the United States you have different grades as well. So Kirkuk is actually a crude coming out of Iraq, and it's very likely that the reason that is here, that is associated to Turkey, is because vessels out of Iraq and Iran, they tend to hide or to mask their activities, and somewhat that cargo was allocated under Turkey. But Kirkuk, just for you for correction here, it's a grade of Iraq crude. And out of UK, you have Brent, Ecofisk, and Forties, the famous BFOE. Which is missing the O, which is a field in Oseberg, but that's basically the combination of crude that comes out of this combination of fields: Brain, Ecofisk, Oseberg, and Forties, and they mainly go to China. So you will see along this section that China and India are big importers, and no wonder they are the main consumers or main importers of the crude oil from the main nations that actually export crude. So from the US, the crude grade are mainly Midland, WTI, we see that Midland, yeah, we can see the number of cargoes that for a specific period of time came out of the US, but we know that is mainly Midland. WTI from Russia, it will be mainly Urals out of Ust-Luga in the Baltics, and it's going to be a CPC, which is a consortium of pipeline that allows you to transport. That is another thing with crude, is in terms of storage. Crude can be stored either in pipelines, or it can be stored and transported via pipelines, or can be transported via shipping. So that's basically what the CPC stands for. That's a consortium of pipelines, and that's how you can also transport crude. Out of Nigeria, it's the Bonny Light mainly, and out of the UK, BFOE, as we saw, and Libya is the SCD grade. Now, what about trophy? When we look at the ops, at the operations conducted by trophy, we see from Iraq, we see, for example, different grades of crude, whereas for Vitol, we saw the Kirkuk out of Iraq. Now for Iraq from Trophy, we are seeing Basra light and Basra heavy. So, and the zones of origins as well, i.e. that's very likely that these are different installations from where the different crude grades is coming from. Al Basra, they produce Basra Light, and from Kirkuk you have that grade of Kirkuk. Now you can see that from Russia. Now you still have the Urals mainly out of Ust-Luga, but you also have different type of grades. From the UK, you still have the BFOE, and from the US you have more areas. But going into China and India, for instance, and of course Italy and that Netherlands, the ARA or ARA region. Bear in mind that with recent developments, or with the latest developments in the US related to shale oil and shale gas, the US is in a major position to become self-sufficient and exporter of crude, precisely because of the increased production and cheaper price that comes from shale oil and shale gas. At the very beginning, we mentioned the type of reservoirs, conventional and unconventional. Conventional being those type of reservoirs that you can easily extract your crude oil from, and unconventional, these are your shale oil, shale gas reservoirs, or in Canada, for example, you're going to have your tight sand reservoir, and those are the reservoirs with restricted access to areas of porosity, or those bucket of spaces. So you can see where Trafigura is operating the most. You can argue that, okay, so if we look at Vitol, it seems that they are doing the same route. We see a lot of influence, or a lot of cargoes being loaded from Russia, being loaded from Iraq, being loaded from the UK. UK has this peculiarity of being from BFOE, Brent, Ekofisk, Brent Fortis, Oseberg, and Ekofisk. But when we really look at the installations that those crudes are coming from, even though they belong to the same country, we start seeing that different crude come from different installations, because different installations process different grades of crude, and different grades of crudes are being loaded in different installations and going into different destinations installation. Even within China, we saw that China is one of the big boys, the top importers of crude oil, like India. The crude oil mainly used for transportation, but even within China, it might be going to different installations which will process different type of crude. You have Colombian crude being loaded into or being transported to the US. Likewise, Russian to China, UK to China, and different grades of the US going into India, for example. Now let me zoom out, and now let's go into, so we've seen Vitol and Trophy. Now let's see Mercuria and Gunvor on the same spectrum. So Gunvor, again, where is he coming from? Where is he going to? Look, a surprise where Gunvor operates. Gunvor actually takes crude grade distillation from Guyana, and he takes to Panama. Panama is actually known for being a major bunkering hub, and bunkering, again, where a lot of vessels go into to either to fuel up their vessels, or and basically take part in major um, trading activities within the fuel oil market. So we see crude granularities, or this crude from Guyana, Lisa, going into Panama. Again, we see Libya playing a big factor going into Belgium, for example. That is Libya going into Italy, for instance. Russia is going to Belgium, but then you will see, even though Urals is the main grade, but for Libya now we're seeing the Sharara grade, which is a different type of grade. And whereas for the US we see the predominant one continue to be the WTI and the Midlands for Gunvor. So straight away you can see that you have a lot of crude from Gunvor being a little bit in terms of origin and destinations, and going into different, loading at different countries, and unloading or discharging into different installations. Belgium is still part of that ARA region, which is Amsterdam, Rotterdam, and Antwerp. But now we see the incorporation of Colombian cargo, especially for those for Castilla, Vasconia, and S. Amer, for example, which is a South American grade in Colombia, going into Panama, which is a different route from the previous traders that we had seen. Mercuria, where does Mercuria operate? When we dive in slightly where Mercuria operates, we see cargoes coming out of Angola, coming out of Brazil and Nigeria. If initially we saw Vito loading a lot from Nigeria, now we see in Angola, which is another Western country that is part of OPEC, the OPEC crude oil producers. Now we see where is actually loading from. Angola. There is a lot coming out of Brazil as well. Lula is a predominant type of crude coming out of Brazil, different installation. So these are the zone origins. As you can see, different zones will load different grades of crude, and there's no better representation than really looking at what we see here. Just to emphasize once again on this time, for when we look at Russia, is coming out of ESPO, rather than the Urals, going into or loading from Mercuria is actually a different grade of crude out of Russia. So you can see straight away that although they might just operate under the same, they have a couple of common countries that they operate under. You see different installations, different crude being loaded, and potentially, although we see India and China, we might emphasize on the fact that these are potential different installations where crude is being discharged. But I'm going to come back at the end to these slides, because what I also want to touch base on is on these shipping capabilities. This is very important, and um, this is something that, as a commodity trader or as a data analyst within a commodity tracking company, as I was working prior to my current job as a risk analyst, I was working as a data analyst, mainly within the product sector, but we used to interact a lot with the crude guys. And more often than not, our clients would be would be giving us the trading sizes of the vessels that they see in the market, and they trying to confirm with us whether we see the same or we see our cargoes at. And that is precisely what I have on this slide. For trading purposes, um, tankers are classified as general purpose tankers, or GP, and you can see their size. The GP are one of the smallest. You also have barges which are even smaller, and they tend to operate within a certain, um, let's say, depth when it comes to areas of operation, because you can imagine that larger vessels will operate within a much larger space, whereas smaller vessels might have draft limits. And draft, what I really means is that smaller vessels cannot go into or larger vessels cannot go into shallow ports purely on the basis of that draft, right? Because they're not going to be able to load accordingly on the basis that, or even enter the port or go through a canal. Panama Canal, for example, has a specific vessel size, and that's why you see the Panamax, for example, is being one of the vessels. The Suez Max is another vessel. Suez Max, it can operate within the Suez Canal, that is belongs to Egypt, and has specific size that can operate within that canal. Now, you have the GP, you have MRs, you have LRs, large range, LR1, LR2, and between the LR2 and the VLCC, a lot of traders will actually mention LR3s in the market, and LR3s in the market are basically anything between. So if VLCC starts, LR3 would basically be between 120 to 160. So LR2 can be split into LR2 and LR3, LR2 being 80 to 120, and LR3 120 to 160, or 159.99 deadweight tonnage, or simply tonnage. Whereas the VLCC, a very large crude carrier, can carry up to 320, and from then onwards is a ULCC ultra large crude carrier. Now, in terms of commodities, you can see on the left hand side what the VLCC carries the most. So the VLCC is crude. It's crude. Mainly, likewise, for you see the Suez can carry both crude and dirty petroleum products, your DPPs. But the crude oil, in terms, if we're just looking at the vertical axis for the crude oil, 60% of the crude is transported in a VLCC, 30% of crude in a Suez Max vessel, 10% is carried in an Aframax, and the Handysize does not carry product. Handymax and Aframax, they are more common within the product market, the dirty petroleum and the clean petroleum products. And at the end of this session, I'm just going to tell you or categorize a little bit on the clean products and on the dirty products. So the Suez Max, you can see the areas of operations coming out of the Middle East into the US East Coast. US East Coast, also known as Pad 1, because the US has a specific split when it comes into pads, and pads is the district by which the US will split its imports and exports areas. So Pad 1 being the East Coast, and that is around the areas of New York and so on, and West Coast is Pad 5, and Gulf Coast would be Pad 3. That's basically how the US splits. And the cargo flows, if we saw that the VLCC is 60% out of the Middle East, the VLCC out of the Middle East into US, the US East Coast has to go through the Suez Canal. That is exactly why you see the Suez Canal, point number one, Middle East into US EC. The Suez Canal is also the gateway from up Western Europe via Med, and Med you're talking about countries in the Mediterranean like Italy, countries like Cyprus. You also have the North Sea Med to the Suez Canal can go from North Sea in the Med loading into from Italy, for example, or loading from, let's say, loading from Cyprus or loading from Greece, going into US East Coast. The Aframax, you see the routes coming out of North Sea to US Pad 1 or US EC East Coast, and the Caribbean to the US Gulf Coast. So that's your Guyana, that's your cargo from Guyana in there. That's your product we saw from the section above, that is mainly carried in the handy size and Aframax with a small percentage of DPP, that's your petroleum product, being carried, and we can see the routes in here, and of course the capabilities, just for another just to bring together what we are saying here. You see the volumes as well in terms of barrels, likewise you see the volumes here in terms of tonnage, these in terms of that weight ton. This should be very well ingrained in the minds of the traders, because you want to know your classifications in terms of deadweight tonnage and also in terms of barrels that you're transporting. Um, just to bring us kind of to the final slide, because I know I appreciate this is a heavy sessions and very detailed on the what the commodity traders do, the areas that they operate, the type of crude, what is crude. We have covered so much today, but this is just to put an emphasis on the refining processes, the chemical conversion processes, and basically how we classify the grades of crude. For example, you have a lot of these processes, because we saw that if crude is trade so that you can actually you buy to meet demand, or you buy because you want to meet demand in a certain area of demand, but products are equally the reason that you want to buy or trade crude, because that's what refineries do. Refineries or refiners, if you want to put that way, they are always short crude, i.e., they need crude, and they long products, meaning they have products and they need to sell. If you need something in general, if you need crude, in this case for a refinery, then you're short crude because you are in need, you are short. But if you have something, if you have production, if you need to sell, then you are long. And refineries, this is the typical profile of a refiner. They are short crude and long products. And what are the processes, or how are they going to break crude into these fractions? These are specific processes, chemical conversion processes that they are going to undergo. At the beginning, we say that we have physical processes, your atmospheric distillation and your vacuum distillation, atmospheric being the very first one, from the moment that the crude is desalted, and your vacuum distillation being one of the last processes that anything that wasn't distilled using atmospheric distillation is going to go into a VGO, and from that you can see the major products that come out of a VGO, and the major processes, of course, to you usable or the marketable fractions that we spoke initially. Some grades of crude I'm just going to highlight, because at the very I'm going to enlarge, because at the very beginning we spoke about two properties: API, which is API and density are the opposite. The higher the density, the lower the API. Therefore, high density heavy crude. Heavy crude has a high density and low API. That is exactly on the scale. The scale you see API 45. That's for light crude. Light crude because it has a low density and a high API of 45, for example. And a heavy crude has a low API and a high density. And we can see the sulfur spec as well in terms of weight percentage. Anything below 0.5% in terms of sulfur content is considered as sweet crude. Crude in terms of sulfur content is defined as either sweet or sour, and then you can see which spec really the which spec which crude belongs to. One of the grades that we saw from Libya was the LCD, and we can see that LCD is actually a light sweet crude, because light it's above, let's say that 30 or even 32 range in terms of API, and is below the zero point 0.5 in terms of sulfur content. Whereas when we look for example other grades, we have seen, for example, Urals coming out of Russia. We have the table here as well, so we can always look at the tables to find the name of the crudes, but the benchmarks really Brent blend with the Brent blend, which is a mixture of the BFOE that we were talking before. You can see that is pretty much borderline sweet. It's somewhat sweet, but it's a light crude. Likewise, the WTI that we see, but the Dubai on the other side is the orange bit. It requires a little bit more work in terms of sulfur extraction, because it's beyond the zero point 0.5 the zero point 0.5 sulfur weight percentage that we see, and somewhat below that threshold for the API, which is around 30 to 32, and the Dubai benchmark is just at, or if not even slightly below that. That's the type of crude and the processes that it undergoes. And like we said multiple times at the very beginning, commodity traders, they need to be aware of all these information that we shared with you today. Now, just to go very quickly through one of the categorizations that we emphasized before on the DPP and CPP, DPP being the dirty petroleum products. They and CPP being the clean products, and clean products will include multiple family of products like the light ends like gasoline and naphtha, middle distillates, gas oil, diesel, jet kero, whereas for the DPP is going to be the fuel oil and many other granularities or many other grades of products. So do get in touch with Georgetown Capital, because they do have great stuff, great material that we have been sharing with you, not only today but in the previous sessions. I really hope that you enjoyed this session today. But do get in touch if you have any question, and we are going to continue to produce these sessions as they've been on high demand. My name is Antonio once again. It's been a pleasure to talking to you, and I hope to deliver these sessions once again. And thank you. Have a good one.